Welcome back to Under the Plate, and today we have a very exciting discussion here on episode 39 of this Final Fantasy VII focused series. It's finally time to talk about what lies beyond the remake project, and could it be DLC, or could it be what Naoki Hamaguchi recently inferred on, which was the possibility of a whole new title? I don't know. I can't be the one to tell you, but I think we have a lot to talk about here today. So, Payne, what was your reaction to Hamaguchi saying that the team was considering whether they bring another new DLC or a full title?
Honestly, I kind of popped off when I first read that news because, I feel like that's really probably the most exciting payoff we could get for this remake trilogy. Also, just apologies. You know, the weather, it's that time of year where weather's changing, so my voice is changing along with it.
It's called the bipolar south here in the US. It's okay.
Yeah, it's horrible. But anyway, yeah, that's honestly such exciting, news. Well, I won't call it news. It's more like a prospect at this point. I'm pretty sure, just about anyone in that team would love to do even more with this universe. Especially since there's a freedom that would come with it, I feel. Because these remake games obviously have had some absurdly high expectations, which, they've been far in a way exceeded in mine and Noah's opinion, but it's obvious that hasn't happened for everyone, per se. You can call them cynics or haters, whatever, but I feel like a new game probably wouldn't have that level of it has to meet, the standards I have because of the original game.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And just to make sure everyone's right here in context with us, I'm going to read the specific interview quote from Hamaguchi. So this was with an interview with WCCF Tech, and the interviewer asked, are there any plans for a DLC to bridge the gap between Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the third title in the remake project, similar to Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade? And Hamaguchi replied, there were definitely some ideas to create a Rebirth DLC, and that was the plan at a certain point in time. But when we revisited this topic and thought about what our priorities should be and what the fans are looking forward to the most, we figured that what fans want the most is to bring the third installment as soon as possible. That would take priority over the Rebirth DLC, so we decided to take that approach. With that being said, once we release the third installment, there is the possibility of having a DLC for that third installment. With the conclusion of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, there's probably going to be a much wider audience for Final Fantasy as a whole. Whether we bring another new DLC or a full title, that's something we are actively considering. So I think it's interesting, we had an Under the Plate video talking about how, Hamaguchi last year had mentioned, hey, we were considering DLC for Rebirth, but we decided we want to focus on Part 3. And at the time we made that video talking about that, that was the right decision. Now granted, if they did do DLC, Vincent would have made the most sense, I think, in my opinion. Just kind of, teeing him up for Part 3. But at the end of the day, this was the right call because everyone's going to be able to see the conclusion of the story sooner. And I think that there's so much potential for DLC or a full title. And to me, I do think it's interesting, specifically saying full title, because if you're saying a DLC for the remake trilogy, and then you're referencing a full title in comparison to that, I kind of feel like he's saying full title in comparison to Part 3 per se. You could point to, maybe a Dirge of Cerberus remaster or something like that, but I'm really leaning towards if this full title thing is real, I kind of believe that they're going to take Advent Children and turn it into a full game.
Honestly, there's so many directions they could go with this. And I don't really know. I kind of don't want to believe that, he's throwing around full title and it would just end up being like a remastered Dirge of Cerberus. Now, albeit, I do believe you're right. Where him using full title in this regard, I do believe he does mean a title much closer in content density, quality, and production value to these remake games.
Yeah, at minimum, Crisis Core, at minimum.
Yeah, and because like even Crisis Core, like even if they just scaled back, because Crisis Core, if you just kind of blitz it and don't mess with the missions too much, it's like a 10 to 15 hour game,
Yeah.
which is, you know, less than half, maybe even a quarter of the size of each of these remake games so far. So like even if they just dialed it back, and imagine if like almost like even the Xenoblade expansions, I feel like even just having like a smaller like full title that's just like a few regions or something, just filled to the brim with either things to do or like important places to go that relate to the story, like whichever way they want to cut it. Because apparently it's controversial to have side content such as Rebirth these days. Apparently,
That's
you
so
know.
crazy. That's so crazy. Like,
But
I'm sorry, I have to get on this tangent real quick. I still think it's so crazy that there are people out there, and again, have your own opinion, but Final Fantasy VII Rebirth had such incredible side quests, and I still see people talk about how, oh, the game had too much content, and it's like 90% of the stuff that people are complaining about, you don't have to do. It's completely optional, and it only builds on the world, right? So again, and I completely agree with your call out, by the way, you know, even if a couple regions, you know, I think about, you know, Rebirth's map and how many regions we had. I could easily see them saying, okay, we're going to take three regions, equate three regions of Rebirth like that and like three big POIs, and that's going to be a game. And again, if they did that with Advent Children, that could work. It really could. But I do think, and that's, you know, when you mentioned earlier about how they would have more creative freedom with the game, if they try to adapt Advent Children and actually expand its storyline to be, you know, cinematic and full length compared to the, you know, 2.5 hour film, they're going to have so much creative freedom. And, you know, Nomura's going to come in, Nojima's going to come in, and they're going to just blow this thing wide open in terms of all kinds of new stuff that was never able to be told in the game. And also, right, we have the whole Traces of Two Past. Oh, I'm thinking of the wrong book. I'm so sorry. We have the novel that is a prelude to Advent Children, right? So I think that that is obviously going to come in, and all those stories can now be showcased if they were to actually adapt this into a full game.
and yeah, because like really the natural like ending point of FF7 just leads right into Advent Children. There's a part of me that wants to like just go crazy and say, what if, because I'm still on the boat of these are going to be, you know, remakes that do for the most part follow the original game. That's mine and Noah's belief, and it will be until we're pretty much proven wrong. But a part of me almost wants to say, what if they just go in a completely different direction? Like maybe part 3 doesn't end like, you know, necessarily different, but maybe there's some kind of thread they can pick up on that's brand new. Or like they say Advent Children is important, but I wonder if they would just have like another chapter, like maybe even past Dirge of Cerberus.
See, and that's the real thing that we need to talk about. Because the end of Dirge of Cerberus and that cliffhanger, Mr. Gact, we've been waiting for an answer on what the heck that means for, I mean, how many years at this point? It's insane. I actually think next year is 20 years since Dirge of Cerberus. So, I mean, I feel like there has to be an answer there, and I totally agree. I mean, if they come in here, I'll be honest, and I'll just ask you point blank, Payne. Do you think that Final Fantasy VII is done when Part 3 comes out?
There's almost a part of me that wants to say, at least give it a break. Because I think that's just healthy for about any series. To at least have a small break. But I kind of understand what Hamaguchi's saying on how these games have kind of brought in some new people. Because I feel like some of the people who are the most cynical about these remake games are fans of the original. Like, diehard. Or at least just aren't super into Final Fantasy, but have like some fond like PS1 memories or something. Of course, that's not everyone, but I feel like that's at least a good subset. And I mean, honestly, like judging on how people online talk about Final Fantasy VII and like these remakes, it seems like they haven't really played any of them, or at least the original. So there's definitely some new fans.
No comment.
No comment. But I do think that there are new people that would be interested in like jumping in to see like a new thing after hopping on the remakes. But I feel I have such conflicted feelings because there really is so much freedom with what they could do with a not necessarily a part 4, dude. Imagine if they're just like, actually part 3 is gonna have another part. We're doing a 4-part FF7 remake, actually.
Right.
But I highly doubt that's gonna happen. There's not really room. There's not really room for that.
There's part 3 has a lot to cover, but also, yeah, I mean, it's just enough to cover to where it's gonna be a filled game.
And really, with part 3, I feel like it might be a smart decision to not have as much of the side content as Rebirth, because they can really just pump it full of, oh, here's like literally all that extra neat stuff from the original reimagined. Here's so much extra stuff for like Vincent and Sid. There's just so much to cover that I feel like it might not need as much side content as Rebirth, even though I don't want to see it gone, if I'm being honest. But kind of
it's hard.
Back more on track. I do 100% believe not doing DLC was a good call. Because I think, you know, they could have done some interesting things. Because, like, no one I've talked to private, like, oh man, imagine, like, an Advent Children DLC. But now that has, like, the opportunity to either be, like, a companion piece to Part 3, or even its entire, like, an entire game. And really, I would love to see that so much, especially after how disappointed I ended up being with, like, its inclusion in Ever Crisis. I feel like Advent Children deserves so much better. And I feel like having a full game for Advent Children would honestly help clear up a bunch of the misconceptions about Cloud's characterization in the film. Because for so many years, people have just gone, oh, like, they Flanderized him, he's just emo boy, but I feel like it's also just because so many people imprinted so much on the original FF7 and haven't engaged in any meaningful ways with the compilation or novels or anything outside of it. And that ties into our last episode on perspective, really. But I think if Advent Children specifically got a swing at having like a full-blown title, because like you were kind of adding on to, like if we had like 3 regions, because at minimum we have Edge, which is, you know, is a city on the outskirts of where Midgar used to be. Like Midgar's ruins like a few miles away.
Right.
So imagine actually getting a little bit of expanded stuff in like, you know, ruined Midgar. And if we have like, dude, imagine like a semi-open world like highway system, inject some FF15 in here, and you actually, there's like delivery side quests on like his bike.
No, I mean, they could totally, it would be such a unique game, I feel like, compared to, I mean, we get some Death Stranding inspiration. Let's pull Kojima in.
Dude,
let's get the package delivery going.
Even, bruh. Because I mean, you can see inspiration from other like popular Japanese games and like of some Western stylization in these remake games. So honestly, if we're just like, let's make Death Stranding Final Fantasy, I would be so there. I'd be so there. Because, you know, FF7 Remake has a bit of Yakuza vibe. And I wouldn't say Rebirth necessarily feels like a Xenoblade. I wouldn't even say it takes like inspiration, because didn't Hamaguchi say he hasn't even played the Xenoblade games recently?
He wasn't. He's. I don't even think he knew they were owned by Nintendo, to be honest.
He was probably like, oh yeah, I remember Takahashi, but honestly, like, because I feel like after we kind of discuss a bit more about this Advent Children, I do think it is worth bringing up a little later that we could see, you know, something like Dirge Cerberus get like a full game treatment, because there's a lot of potential there as well.
Definitely.
But another thing we could get from like Advent Children being expanded is like, what if there is something like that kind of references the old PHS system? Because, you know, a big part of Advent Children is like the phone calls and such. So what if that was like a transitionary device between like, we actually see like some of the stuff Barrett's up to. Oh, we actually get to like see what like Sid, Yuffie, Kate Sith, and Red are all doing before that, because a lot of them just kind of show up at the end. There's even a chance to explore
Right.
more with like the Turks and Rufus.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. And I it came back to me as we were talking, because I somehow blanked on the title of a book I've read 4 times. But On a Way to a Smile, right? The light novel written by Nojima that discusses kind of where the characters were at in the events leading up to Advent Children, that could easily be taken and fully expanded upon into a game. And to answer my own question from earlier, like, do I believe that Final Fantasy VII is ending with the remake trilogy? Absolutely not. I don't think it takes a genius to look at Square and see that they understand the financial potential of Final Fantasy VII as an IP. And realistically, I definitely want to see Advent Children done justice. I want my answers on what the heck happened at the end of Dirge Cerberus and where that's going to lead. But I also definitely sympathize and do feel with the idea that Final Fantasy VII should be laid to rest with Part 3. I completely believe that this is going to be like the ultimate kickoff, send-off for the series as a whole, which is crazy calling it a series, but it is at this point. So I do believe this is the end. However, I just do not see Square Enix stopping. They're going to continue making these games. There's so many more stories in the compilation that they've yet to really dive into. And again, Hamaguchi said it himself. They are actively considering it right now, and Part 3 has not even been titled. They're actively considering potentially a brand new game in 2025. And yes, of course they're going to consider it now, because we know how development cycles work. If they're considering it now, it has to go likely into production before Part 3 is even out. So, I mean, again, they could probably even be working on a game starting next year, whether that be DLC or a full new game. But I am in 100% confidence that there is going to be more content for Final Fantasy VII Remake as a series beyond Part 3. I definitely believe in the idea of, giving it some time in between releases, but there is the reality that this team is together right now and has been together for the entirety of development in-house at Square for the remake project, so you might as well let them finish it out before moving on to another title.
And really, I can just like throw out multiple reasons or like things they could be using to gauge some of this. Because some of this was just kind of brought up by Hamaguchi because, Remake Intergrade is coming to Switch 2 and Xbox. Well, I'm going to be quite honest, they're not going to really expand their reach on Xbox. Japanese games just kind of notoriously do not sell on Xbox. We're talking like literal thousands, tens of thousands of copies. But Switch 2, I mean, that already has like 10 million potential customers. Although I guess, let's be real, a lot of Nintendo fans don't go too hard into JRPGs. But Final Fantasy is a much more prolific name in many ways than even Xenoblade. And if even those games have found moderate success, I could easily see, remakes selling at least 1 million plus copies on Switch 2. And I also think it's such a spectacle to see, because look at how Cyberpunk did. Cyberpunk, kind of pushes graphics in a different way than 7 Remake. But I'm not gonna lie. This is my honest to God opinion here. There are games that look better than FF7 Remake and Rebirth. But I do not think there are games that are presented better than Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. Those cutscenes are
with
actually
cinematics
unreal.
and all that.
I've never seen a game actually transition that smooth from semi-turn-based action combat. The camera literally just swoops from a cutscene into gameplay seamlessly. It's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, and not even FF16 manages that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And we've talked about this, as we've talked about a lot of things, as I always say. But I do just think it's important, right? When I bring this stuff up, we've got full episodes on these topics, so feel free if something interests you, go check it out because I'm sure we've got a discussion on it. But point being with the Switch 2 stuff, it cannot be understated how massive of a deal it is that this game and this series is coming to Switch 2. Because it's not just Remake Intergrade. Rebirth is coming and Part 3 is coming. We already know that. So the fact that Square Enix has already confirmed that is a huge deal. Everyone that I know that has had their hands on this port has just said incredible things. It's running at 1080p 30 in handheld. It looks awesome. And you have to think about the fact that, yeah, Nintendo has a very different audience than a lot of other platforms, but that's such a big advantage and such a big deal for Square Enix because, again, I'll take your example of Cyberpunk, right? Cyberpunk was $70 and is still in the top 10 in the eShop all the time. Sure, you can point to, okay, there aren't super, a ton of big Switch 2 third-party games on the platform yet, but it cannot be understated how huge that release has been on Switch 2. And when we look at Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, that game is going to be new for millions of players, and it's $40. It's priced excellently. It's priced better than most other ports of its caliber on the console. Sure, it's an older game, but even Ubisoft's recent games are coming in at higher prices. I think this is a huge recipe for success. It's going to build up the fandom even more. And yeah, they've got this, this big release with Remake Intergrade, and then when Rebirth comes around, probably, hopefully next year, that's a whole other cycle to get people interested in Remake Intergrade, and I'm sure they'll do the Twin Pack promotion. It's a great thing. I had multiple people in my life that got into the Final Fantasy VII through that Twin Pack, and I think, offering the original game is a great idea, but, tying this discussion together, why are we talking about the Switch 2 stuff? Because it directly ties into what Hamaguchi is talking about here and why another part of Final Fantasy VII Remake, or really DLC, which is, I think, most likely, why that makes a lot of sense. Because if you're building up this whole audience, we already know, let's state the obvious, I'm sorry, I would be flabbergasted if all platforms receive Part 3 on day one. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think you should expect an exclusivity window, as we've talked about, but with that being the case, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, that's a game that will be continued to be marketed as it releases on other platforms. However, beyond that, right, when that's done, there is nothing that is going to get people more excited and people more invested in checking out the trilogy as a whole than following it up with something else that's exciting and new.
And I was talking about having a crazy idea earlier. And, I think it would be insane for them to go beyond Dirge of Cerberus. Because, we brought up Gact. Genesis has, that big, ending, teaser for something that never truly came to be, at least yet. And I think that's another possibility that we could see for a DLC or Part 4. But kind of before we dive into that, I'm kind of curious about what you think. Are you leaning more towards them having DLC for Part 3, or are they just gonna say, let's just honestly jump to a Part 4 or the actual next step in the compilation? Because if I'm being honest, I kind of wholeheartedly believe that they might not remake Dirge of Cerberus as a full-blown remake. I'm not entirely sure, because I would honestly lean more towards Advent Children as we've discussed. But what are you leaning more towards? Full game or DLC?
Both.
Honestly, I think once they start seeing... Because tying back to the Switch 2 stuff. So... I'd heard reports about things like, the Mario Kart World sales have declined and stagnated. Do you know why that is? They have literally reached saturation. The Switch 2 is at 10 million copies, and there's probably only about 250,000 Switch 2 owners that don't own Mario Kart World. That's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's a 90% attach rate or something near that.
It's absurd.
So, yeah.
And what's so great about releasing something like this for so cheap, with the promises of all of the sequels coming out within like the next couple years on the console, when you have a history of releasing these in packs for a great price? Because honestly, they might do it, but I'm kind of leaning towards the potential like twin pack, with Remake and Rebirth being like $60 on Switch 2. Imagine the insanity if they were like, here it is for $40, just both.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely lean 60 as well, but it's a possibility. It really is a possibility. And when I say both that I believe they're making, I believe that we will get DLC for Part 3 in the form of an expanded telling of Advent Children. And Advent Children, as we discussed, it's a 2.5-hour film for the complete version. I'd expect them to take that to about 10 hours and find new ways and thread all kinds of stuff to expand it and tell that story. And when I say I think we will get a new game, I totally think they're going to remake Dirge of Cerberus. However, I think, and I would not be surprised, if Dirge of Cerberus is a much different game, although telling the same story and expanding upon it. And what I mean by that is, I don't know why I feel this way, to be honest. It's just kind of a gut feeling. I really wouldn't be surprised if they change the fact that Vincent is the main playable character for Dirge of Cerberus.
Call me crazy. Again, I guess I'm just feeling a little insane. I don't think this will happen, but what if they just combined Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus, especially since they're so
See,
close?
That would be crazy. I mean, because think about it, right? You could totally do that if you had an Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 structure, but it would be really weird with the time skips. You know what I mean? It would, I don't know how they do it, but you could have Act 1 be On a Way to a Smile, adapt all those short stories, expand them out, could easily be 10 hours. Then you have Advent Children, could be 10 hours. And then you have Dirge of Cerberus. And then you have what's beyond Dirge of Cerberus. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. It's really challenging. They have already talked about Dirge of Cerberus, right? As a remake. And they've already kind of basically said, and they being the development team, they've already basically said, we're not going to think about remaking that until after Part 3. And it makes sense because it is the last point in the timeline. And it doesn't really make sense to release Dirge of Cerberus now, before Part 3, as here's what happens after the ending of the game. Now play the game to see the ending that happened before Dirge. Doesn't make much sense. So I understand why they haven't done it yet. But I really do feel that is going to be explored. And you listen to the passion and just how much these developers care, especially Hamaguchi. I just refuse to believe that they are not just itching to tell that story and expand upon it with what happened at the ending and finally rectify that teaser.
I really do feel like that's because ultimately these games have been somewhat planned out for quite a while. They've had their rough ideas for how they would handle this remake for ages. And that's what this is the whole point of the compilation in a sense. So much about these remake games, while not 100% perfectly in line with specific aspects of continuity, we've discussed how it merges them and makes them all part of a coherent universe. And that's part of, the perspective and some of the noise that Nomura's talked about with things like the compilation. We talked about it a lot last episode. But I think actually continuing that would be, one, such good fan service, and two, a good opportunity to start wrapping things. Actually wrapping things for a potential break. I think that's another way of tackling this. Because another crazy idea, what if, they did something closer to we have once again, we've talked about this in some other level of detail with some other perspectives.
We just gotta stop saying it at this point. We've talked about everything.
Basically, if anything we say, if it piques your interest, just check the playlist. We probably have oh man, I wish they tangented more about that. Don't worry, we did. And if we haven't yet, we're going to. But really, I think the smartest bet, because like you said, it's the last point in the timeline. Because we got Crisis Core Reunion. Check the review on our website. We got Crisis Core Reunion, and they didn't really change anything. You know, they added some neat stuff like, the Buster Sword mode, which is a lot more like Cloud's Punisher thing. So small little connective tissue there gameplay-wise to Remake, but story-wise, they didn't change a thing. But they did keep all the Deep Ground and Genesis stuff like at the end and all of that. And I think it would be severely disappointing for them to just abandon that. And, you know, we could get some like boss fights or quest lines in Part 3 or DLC about it. But I think Dirge of Cerberus should just get, like, as we've said before, I do think it should get some kind of like Crisis Core Reunion level remake at minimum. But I do think they should, you know, that gameplay would probably entirely be reworked, ripped out. I honestly think they would even change aspects of the level design if given the chance. Because I don't think they would want to, because of purely that game's reputation, it wasn't held as in high of a regard as something like Crisis Core. They probably wouldn't want to just give it to us straight. And the North American version of the game was already improved over like the original Japanese release. So I think we would just get like a third layer of improvements at minimum. But really, if they wanted to like possibly do Dirge of Cerberus as a DLC, I think it could work. I think that could work after Part 3, because, you know, they could use, honestly, either Advent Children or Dirge of Cerberus. Like, maybe not even combining them, but having them as two separate, like, DLCs, I think, could be an interesting idea. Especially because, let's be real, they'd be able to reuse so many assets and probably not bloat the file size too bad. Because that's kind of what the Yuffie DLC did. It, you know, just reused Midgar from Remake. There was really nothing additional to it. And after Part 3, we're going to have the entire world map done. This game's going to be 250 gigabytes. It's going to be bigger than Call of Duty. You're gonna be able to sign up to stream your assets to your console, download all the textures as you play. Just like Call of Duty. No. But seriously, I could see like a 2 DLC thing going on. I think that would be kind of fun and interesting and give a bit of longevity to Part 3. Although, that could also end up being a thing like, oh, here's like, we release this DLC like the same day like the Switch 2 version comes out or something. To like celebrate the port, because that's not exactly unheard of, you know? But I would always love to have like full games for something like this. And I think Dirge of Cerberus, much in the same way as Advent Children could be, they both have the potential to be a little better reimagined and like fleshed out. Because Dirge of Cerberus has so much interesting stuff in it, I think it would almost be a shame to have it just be a reunion style thing. And even though the remake games are much better written about around all of the stuff in the compilation, it just makes me wonder if they want to have a potential Part 4 be something beyond that, or just actually integrating these like even more beautifully into this.
Yeah. No, it's a challenging puzzle. I want to call out when we talk about Dirge of Cerberus and how they left in the Genesis bit. What I think is even more interesting is that in The First Soldier, right, the story about young Sephiroth and his coming up as a hero, he calls Genesis in the opening cutscene. So Genesis has been referenced in one of the newest stories in the compilation. Obviously, it's a character that Nojima's thinking about. So for me, I just have to feel like they have to capitalize on that. And I don't think a simple data fight or little mention in Part 3 is going to do that. You don't keep him in Crisis Core, tease him in The First Soldier, and not capitalize on it. You just don't. I truthfully believe Dirge of Cerberus is going to get something, whether it be DLC or a remake. And, you know, I absolutely think if they decide to go the Crisis Core route, and keep the story exactly the same, I think that right there might even set up for something afterwards, right?
Because really, I've already said it, but there is so much potential for this, and I think that's precisely why Hamaguchi talked about this. Because honestly, I think this is the most interesting direction FF7 could go. Do I think it could kind of, not necessarily be like sunsetted, but at least go on break for a while after Part 3 comes out? Yeah, I think it could. You know, here's like your Dirge remaster, here's maybe a little more Ever Crisis content, and I think that would be satisfying for a while. I think that would be perfectly suitable. But like you brought up earlier, I think they are really starting to form a vision of this being more. And that's interesting
Right.
in and of itself, because what could this more be? Like, we've sat here and talked about it could just be, you know, like actually, because a big part of these remake games has been integrating things from the books and compilations, so actually giving some extra love and care to things like Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus would be great. But there's also a part of me that's just like, where could they go from here? And, you know, that line, the unknown journey continues from Remake, can just still ring in your head in multiple ways. No promises to keep.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, even if, like, you know, I'd still believe Part 3 is going to practically end the same as the original, just with some extra tidbits. We've been over this. But where's it go from there? Like, where's it truly go after this? And the true crazy bit I'm coming up with, like, you know, I don't believe there's true timeline multiversal shenanigans going on, because FF7 is a game about perspective. And that's why Nojima took so much inspiration from things like Yogacara and, you know, Jung psychology. Like, it's all there. However, what if they were like, after all this, what if there was some, like, crazy actual otherworld stuff going on? What if we did get, like, some alternate timeline stuff after FF7?
I don't know. I don't know about
people
that.
want it, but I'm not even saying like it's some like, oh, Aerith is like actually revived. What if they just were like, what if we just want to change some stuff after? I'm not gonna bet money on it, but it's at least something I wanted to bring up and discuss.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like at least when it comes to following up the remake trilogy, you know, I don't see Square going back in time per se. I don't see them releasing anything, maybe a prequel, but I don't know that a prequel really makes sense right now. We have Crisis Core, that's good enough. Anything that I think is released after Part 3 will be stuff that follows the continuity of Part 3. So Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, or something else entirely, because they got around to finally being like, oh crap, we've got to figure out what Genesis is doing.
And really, I think that's what they should do. Like, any potential DLC or other part needs to actually pick up some of these pieces they've kind of just left on the floor. Because, like, we know Genesis is alive, because that's the end of Dirge of Cerberus. And Dirge of Cerberus has so much interesting things that who's going to complain about having more lore or even exploring some more of these themes? Like, because there's just so much to the world of FF7 that can be explored. Like, honestly, what if we just had we brought up some of our ideas for an Advent Children full game, this Death Stranding thing. What if there is some weird, like, game where it was more about, like, some of the Red 13 stuff that kind of leads up to that 500-year time jump?
Yeah, that would be interesting, of kind of hopping between, you know, potentially beyond where the party is alive. That would be interesting.
Because I think that's, like, an interesting thing, like, some RPGs kind of touch upon, because we've seen some stuff like that as parts of the main story in Xenoblade 2, especially with things like Torna, where we see, like, these huge jumps in time for these, like, really important and awesome characters. And that's something that's cool to see. but that's, done in a more prequel style. So I think kind of flipping that something like an idea like that on its head and actually kind of exploring some of that stuff. Because the thing is, what if there's also even more loose ends in part 3? Because I think, of course, it's going to wrap up the main story of FF7, but who's to say that it won't kind of introduce some new things to chew on?
Right. No, I mean, and I feel like that it definitely will. I do think with all the messaging about everyone being satisfied with the ending and just overall the mysteries that they've introduced and talking about building up to those and solving those in part 3, I do think that they're going to answer what most people want answered in terms of the big picture stuff. But I can totally see them, throwing little lore nuggets here and there in, the info glossaries and stuff like that, or in the world itself as kind of Easter eggs. Like for example, I'm pretty sure it was Emerald Weapon, but it was in Tifa's room. And it was kind of a tease to, the Emerald Weapon for part 3. I could definitely see them doing some stuff to try to throw some stuff out there to get people thinking and maybe be explored in, what they're going to do for Advent Children. But I just, again, to reiterate, I'm 100% confident that Advent Children is going to get remade one way or another, whether that be DLC or a full game. I mean, realistically, if I could pick, I would want a 4th part of like expanding all of Advent Children into one game, just because I think it would be so interesting to see what that vision would look like from the creatives. Advent Children has a story. It's a story. I really love aspects of it, and there are aspects of it I really don't like. So I'm really curious if they were able to, Turks Are Alright, On a Way to a Smile, and Advent Children, put that all into one big experience to tell the story of what happens after the meteor, would be really, really cool. So it's going to be interesting either way. I feel like the key thing here is that, Square Enix has 2 games basically that they can go to. You can do Advent Children or you can do Dirge of Cerberus. And I do think both of them will get remade in some fashion. It just depends on how Square wants to do it.
I agree, and really here's honestly my ideal for how they'd handle this. Advent Children is honestly the thing I want to see in an actual playable state. Like, it's just... Because really, I'd say the biggest problems I have with Advent Children as a story just come from pretty much any, Square Enix project that I have story problems with. Because most of the time, it's not even, the story or characters in and of themselves I have the issues with. It just comes with, oh, you guys really tried to cram, too much into too small of a package. Or encountered some kind of issues where things had to be cut. Because, Advent Children Complete kind of gives a bit of a clearer picture of some of the background stuff going on in Advent Children and gives you a bit more characterization all around. But, even look at something like FF16. I don't think no one I would lie about our feelings on some of the ways the story doesn't meet what it sets up, and that's kind of purely because there was just so much to do that I don't think they really had the capacity to live up to what they set up. And a lot of that just comes down to things like time and, scale of the project. But Advent Children's not a huge story. It's not a huge story like the original FF7 and the whole compilation. It's just a part, so I feel like that's just the perfect little chunk to dive into. Because let's even look at Remake. That Midgar section in the original game's 6 to 8 hours pretty much? Only a third to a quarter of the original FF7, depending on how much you do there.
Maybe 6 to 8 hours. I would say 5, honestly.
Because really, you can beat all of FF7, including some of the extra stuff with Yuffie and Vincent, as long as you know what you're doing, not even to an absurd degree. You can do it in 24, 25 hours. The length of old Final Fantasies and RPGs in general is so heavily exaggerated online. So bearing that in mind, this 5 to 8 hour section was blown up to 40. And I have a couple of like slow pacing issues with Remake, but the thing is, like, I don't feel like the story suffers from it whatsoever. Because literally every facet of the stuff they added does contribute, like, in, if not always fun ways per se, then always interesting ways, I feel. Because I wouldn't say like something in Rebirth, like people like bringing up like the chicken or mushroom mini game, you know, but that stuff honestly adds to small things like village life and what people do. That has like actual real world contributions to that story, and that's like literally just a few minute snippets of things to immerse you. And there's so much opportunity in something like Advent Children to actually get you even deeper in that story. Because, like I was saying a minute ago, I feel like the biggest problem of some of Square Enix storytelling that people kinda don't gel with as much comes down to really not having enough time to dedicate to certain things. And yeah, people complain about some of these extras or duller moments, but that's part of the ebb and flow of really building up a world, narrative, and characters, in my opinion. And with Advent Children, I feel like they can establish so much with its tone, because this is really the first time we got to see the world post-Meteor. Because, you know, we ended up having things like Crisis Core after, but almost everything goes before that. And most of something like Dirge of Cerberus is exploring some of the deep ground and like some more war-torn areas because of the deep ground stuff. And we don't really have that in Advent Children. We get to touch upon things like, you know, how a new Seventh Heaven, like, because they have that bit of bar get up and then Strife delivery service. And there's, you know, Barrett's actually going out and doing like oil rigging and actually these fields to provide alternative power. And I feel like there's so much in Advent Children that can get a little bit of time, just even a little bit of extra time, and it would build up something like Dirge of Cerberus even more. So I think an Advent Children DLC that's, like you said, like at least 10 hours, I would say a minimum of 5. Because if they stayed fairly true to the cutscenes and added a gameplay, like, I guess that would be fine. That'd be fine. It'd be okay. But I think they really need to hit that 10-hour mark if it's going to be a DLC. Because kind of my ideal with the idea of them going beyond the remakes is have a nice, meaty, like, Advent Children DLC. 10 hours. You can do some crazy, amazing things and really flesh that out. And honestly build up to a Dirge of Cerberus, like, remaster remake. Because I feel like we were talking about, that Genesis stuff. I think that really is the direction they should go, and it's honestly something I'm excited about. Because think about some of the stuff at the end of Crisis Core with, like, Minerva, some of the stuff with Loveless and how it's got even more love in Rebirth. I really think that's what they should do. I really think it should go have a good Advent Children DLC, jump to like a pretty highbrow Dirge of Cerberus remake, and then really the world's their oyster. They can truly do whatever they feel they need to do, and I trust these guys. I trust this team through and through to like pretty much every standard. Because even though we kind of complained a little about Advent Children here, do you know how often I just throw that movie on? Because, like, it's entertaining, and honestly, it's just such a unique vibe for FF7. Because, really, it's that tonal shift, and there's some hope there, especially in, like, Dirge of Cerberus and, like, the end of Advent Children. It really is a completely different vibe, because FF7 is about, like, the fight for survival and like the fight to protect things, but Advent Children is dealing with that brokenness and emptiness and trying to cling on to hope after it seems like you didn't even manage to do everything you wanted to do. Because that's That's what the mischaracterization with Cloud stuff is. It's him dealing with the things from FF7. And I think, going from part 3 into a DLC some months later is a good way to explore that and transition to whatever the next evolution of FF7 could be.
Right. And if they just want to stop after Advent Children and Dirge, that's fine. But I just don't think that with the effort that they put in to bring now 3, and with part 3, 4, counting Crisis Core titles to modern platforms in new light with the remake project, I don't see them not bringing those 2 experiences forward. I would love to say the same about Before Crisis, not happening. So with Advent Children, one of the things that gets me most excited and why I believe that, because look, right, I'm the same way as you. I've watched Advent Children as a film so many times. I can't even tell you how many times at this point. And one of the things I think that would make it such an exciting thing to be a game is the fact that it has never been a game before, A, but B, fundamentally the gameplay would be a lot different than FF7 Remake, right? You have now introduced the idea of having a vehicle that Cloud drives around. So, right, we have vehicles in part 3, we have vehicles in Rebirth that you drive around. He even drove around the Daytona in FF7 Remake in Midgar. But what would get really interesting is having just a bike that you drive around the map. And also think about the fact that, okay, Cloud has the fusion sword. That's going to be a lot different than the Buster Sword in many ways. So Cloud's moveset's going to change a lot. The fundamental gameplay of moving location to location is going to change a lot. And I just can't help but feel that the loop and just the different gameplay opportunities that this development team can come up with would be vastly different than FF7. And I think that's awesome. I think that would be so cool and such a refreshing take after 3 games, evolving one formula into what it can be. I think it would be really exciting to see it take pieces of that, but throw it on its head and give us something familiar yet different.
And I think that's kind of why, even though I'd appreciate getting a full 20 plus hour experience out of Advent Children, that's kind of why I think having a couple regions, 2 or 3, and expanding on things included in On a Way to a Smile and some other compilation stuff, and whatever, because honestly they could change a couple dynamics or have a couple of extra lines of plot that follow from part 3 into Advent Children, because there's some good Advent Children DNA kind of sprinkled throughout Remake and Rebirth, and they re-released it in theaters. They talked about it in interviews connecting to this project. So I think it would make sense. I think it makes sense, and honestly, gosh, we could honestly make a whole video on the gameplay possibilities of this being a DLC or remake. Because you're right, the Fusion Blade, honestly think they could, because I could kind of envision them just maybe even having a DLC size like this just be Cloud. I think that's entirely possible. And you know how Rebirth and Remake during certain story chapters put you in the shoes of someone outside of Cloud? Well, there's parts in the movie where Cloud's only fighting with specific parts of the Fusion Blade, and I think that could make for some really interesting boss fights and other things. Because, imagine, we have these really amazing multi-phase boss fights throughout the Remake games so far. I could just so imagine, a City of the Ancients boss fight where they just partway through you lose parts of the blade, or Cloud has to do things like stick it into trees or buildings during the Sephiroth fight.
Right.
I think there's a lot of potential to honestly frame battles in such interesting ways that way. Maybe part of Cloud's moveset isn't available because he has to stand on the sword or run up this part of a building. Imagine almost a Mario Galaxy-esque, you have part of this fight where the camera flips and you're like literally on the side of a building.
Yeah, I mean, it could really get Kingdom Heartsy in that way. I think the thing for me that sticks out is they have the potential to make Geostigma a gameplay element, right? And have it be something that could afflict Cloud while fighting. And I just think that the idea of telling that story and putting gameplay with it is fascinating to me. And I really do hope that the development team, when they're thinking about what's next, I really do hope that they do end up doing this. I really want to see Dirge, don't get me wrong. But if I had to pick like one thing to cap off FF7, it would be this, reimagined full Advent Children retelling, because I just think it would be so freaking cool. I think it would be so freaking cool. And it is worth noting, right? Square Enix clearly cares about Advent Children. I mean, the movie was re-released in theaters. They did a brand new 4K Blu-ray. They've put it out there. The theater thing was a big deal. They even had like you got to go to the theater, and there was a 15-minute message from Hamaguchi, Kitase, Nomura, and I think Nojima as well. But they kind of just discussed bits and elements of Advent Children and the themes of it overall before the movie. And so, I feel like Square Enix clearly cares about Advent Children, and the creatives behind it do as well. I really just want to see this brought to its full potential glory. There are just elements in there, and I think about even character relationships. Like, you look at Denzel, you look at Cloud and Tifa, there's a lot of very interesting dynamics that happen in Advent Children that are obviously explored, but they don't have as much depth as they could in potentially a game. And I think with that DLC, you take that, you can really build that out and give these characters just amazing characterization, because they've already received it, right? Remake and Rebirth and Part 3, we can assume that hopefully, fingers crossed, everyone's going to end up fulfilled character arcs and really just greatly imagined. But with Advent Children, you take On the Way to a Smile, you take all that stuff, you bring it in there, you bring The Turks Are Alright, you put all this stuff in here, and you finally start to piece together the remaining bits of the compilation. You add in new stuff, and you can take a character, even Cloud, right? And the whole idea of what Nomura said of, with Aerith, the idea that consciousness lives on, and it lives on inside Cloud for Aerith, right? You take that, you can really exemplify that in the grief that he feels in a game like this. And like I mentioned, just Tifa is a very important character in Advent Children, has prime room for expansion. Barrett has stuff that can easily be expanded. Then there's Vincent and Sid. There's just so much opportunity to really expand and make this unforgettable and just a beautiful ode to Advent Children. But I'm really curious what they do. I really am. I feel like it's a flip of a coin of whether or not they're going to decide doing what. If I had to pick and there was no consequences, I'd say let's make like Advent Children a 20-hour game, and let's build it out to this huge thing. It's got like 4 main regions. It's like, just huge. I'd love that. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to get DLC. I still think the DLC is going to be amazing, but I really, really hope that it happens, and then that leads to Dirge of Cerberus getting something, and if the team wants to put out more, they will put out more, I do think a lot of this, in terms of beyond Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus, is kind of riding on sales, obviously, like anything. But I can't help but feel that, as with the stuff we talked about, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, PC, all having these games, it feels like Square Enix is absolutely going to have a huge amount of interest in continuing on FF7, whether we like it or not. I think this is a key part of the business, considering that Final Fantasy as a whole, the median age of Final Fantasy players is much older than a lot of other comparable Japanese RPG series. So I think that, if you're able to connect with a younger audience with something like Final Fantasy VII in the Remake trilogy, Square is going to want to continue that and really push that to the forefront of their business. So It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I just feel that there is unlimited potential to finally really put Advent Children in. And also, I love shout out to the original voice actors for Advent Children, but oh my gosh, like I need that fully redone with the remake trilogy characters, because I close my eyes, I hear all of the different characters in the series from the remake trilogy. They all fit the characters perfectly. There's just there are a lot of scenes that I want like redone, man. I really do.
And like, just like you said, absolutely no disrespect to that original voice cast, because like it's clear
No,
it's
very
clear they've
talented.
taken a lot of inspiration from them for this next generation of like voice actors they're bringing out with this game, because you can listen to Cody Christen and be like, okay, they clearly kind of directed him in a similar way to Steve Burton at bare minimum, because that is Cloud. But also, just like Steve Burton isn't typically a voice actor. I mean, neither are some of these new people, but I feel like Cody Christen does honestly give a much better and layered performance. And some of that could come down to some like newer like voice direction standards, because honestly, a lot of the dubs Square's been putting out for like especially their bigger games have been great in my opinion. 16 has
Yeah.
a great dub, and they even have a history of pretty good dubs with things like 12 and 13. It's usually side projects that fall off in my opinion a little. But this new voice cast is so amazing, and I think these are the voices these characters have always needed in English, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is kind of funny you said that because Cody Christian is not known for his voice acting, which is funny, but it's just his voice, man. His voice is Cloud. He barely changes it. It's funny, but obviously just incredibly talented actor. All of the cast, even for Advent Children, of course, just very talented cast, and I'm very, very excited at the prospect of this new cast getting a chance to revisit that material in an expanded new way. But yeah, I mean, to wrap things up, there's a lot of potential here with a Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 4 or DLC, according to Naoki Hamaguchi, and the team is actively considering it. And to me, actively considering it means if they're considering it right now, I mean, they've marketed this as a trilogy for so long. Clearly, they know that the demand is there. It's not a question of whether or not the demand is there,
Absolutely not. I mean, we're both sitting here. We've sat here for over an hour just talking about what we would want out of this. So, and let's be honest, people have talked about this type of thing for years, continuing FF7. There's been teases. And honestly, I hope I hope part 3 does excellent. I hope it does well. I'm sure it'll do good. For sure. Because honestly, I feel like the impending release of part 3 is going to drive up sales, especially if they do a triple pack. There's the Switch 2 stuff. So I think there's a pretty strong chance of us seeing stuff beyond Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Be it another remake entry, a brand new entry in Final Fantasy VII. The future is bright, and even if they, kind of capped things off with Part 3, like maybe they end up making a decision outside of just like, oh, it's sold well, let's continue it. Maybe they change their mind, because this is still consideration. Like, maybe it could happen, maybe it won't, but there's so much room on the table for it. There's so much potential, and I think this could also be a good opportunity to, Nomura's kind of already stepped back a little. He's done most of the things he's needed to do for his, co-director and creative producer or director roles, and I think this could honestly be a good chance to kind of have Hamaguchi come into his own, because you have people like Yoshida at Square Enix who says 14's his life work. And I don't think FF7's gonna be Hamaguchi's life work, but I think honestly having him step up and do like a bit more with FF7 would honestly be really interesting, and I'd be there for it.
No, I definitely would be too. I mean, I can attest to this as someone who has met him in person multiple times. He lives and breathes Final Fantasy VII. Like, he is the radiant ball of sunshine, and he just loves everything. I really would love to see him be able to kind of tackle that. And I think, with potentially Advent Children, obviously, Nojima and Nomura are going to be involved, but I do think that he's going to have that opportunity to really interject his opinion in there and guide the direction of that expanded telling of Advent Children. So I really do hope he gets a chance to do it. Obviously, he's going to have multiple projects he's working on. He's already said that. I feel like at least already hinted at that he's definitely working on a lot of things right now. Most developers at his level are, helping out here and there. Look at Nomura, look at Kitase, etc. So I definitely think that Hamaguchi working on Final Fantasy VII after Part 3 would be really cool. And we've mentioned this. I want him to direct FF17. Now, granted, we'll see if that happens because who knows when that game is coming out at this point. But still, with Part 3 and with them already talking about continuing on, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to get something, whether it be DLC or a new game or who knows, another remake, a 1-to-1 remake in the original art style for everyone.
So what they're actually going to do, FF7 Remake Part 4 is going to be a prequel game. You know why? It's going to be Final Fantasy X Remake, actually.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, thank you. I'm still waiting on the incredible story of 10-3. So that's a story for another time, though. All right, everyone. With that being said, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 39 of Under the Plate, and we hope you really enjoyed our discussion today. As always, be sure to let us know your thoughts in the description on would you want a part 4? Are you hoping to see Advent Children or Dirge of Cerberus get announced? And are you a fan of Gak? Do you want him back? I mean, I have to say, I do. I think Payne does too. So we will catch y'all next time. But thank you so much for watching, subscribing, commenting. We greatly appreciate the support. And we'll see you on the next episode.